Hi, welcome back everybody to Off the Shelf Book Talk with Book People. I am Elizabeth Nelson here with Kay Johnson again. What have you been reading?
Well, I just finished the 608-page book, The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson.
Oh, I want to read that one.
It's actually not 608 pages, so it's 478 with a biography on the back, just to make that really clear to people. And it is the story of Winston Churchill, his family, and the Blitz. And if you saw the movie The Darkest Hour, which came out in 2017, it's in essence a written account which is told in that movie.
Okay.
And the interesting thing about it is that Churchill became Prime Minister of Great Britain on May 10th, 1940. On that day, Germany invaded France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Netherlands.
So you're saying this is all a big coincidence, right?
I'm just saying that what a bad day to get a new job. And then, as Germany surged into France, 6 days later, he was told, we're going to lose the war. You know, France is going to fall. And so Britain had 400,000 soldiers there. And when France thought the Ardennes was impenetrable with tanks. And they were wrong. So they just came plowing through the Germans, and they split the Allied forces. And so some ended up north and some south. And the ones north ended up gathering on the shore or on the coastline by Calais and Dunkirk and along there. And anyway, back in England, you know, Churchill is desperate to save those soldiers because that's a good part of the British Army.
Yeah.
And so there's a fellow named Ramsay who's Vice Admiral, and he happens to be holding court in one of the basement rooms at Dover Castle, he and a small group, and they are tasked with the idea of saving some of those soldiers. And so the Operation Dynamo, and the name comes from, he happened to look over, and that's what they called the room that created the electricity in their building, the Dynamo. So it became Operation Dynamo, and they put out a kind of a secret call for ships to travel the 21 miles to the French coast to save the soldiers. And ultimately they had more than 800 vessels of all shapes and sizes, and many, many, many citizen sailors. And instead of saving 50,000, which was their goal, they saved over 332,000, and literally saved the British Army. But the interesting thing about it is that Churchill on June 4th went and announced in the House of Commons that wars aren't won by evacuations, even though people were thrilled that Dunkirk worked. And that's when he gave his famous speech about that they'll fight on the beaches. We will never surrender. And that's a great moment in The Darkest Hour.
Especially if you listen to Gary Oldman do it.
Yeah, exactly. And he did win an Academy Award for that.
He did.
But the thing about the book that's interesting, which the movie doesn't really touch on, is the dynamics of the Churchill family.
Okay.
Because he's got an older son who's a loser. He's a gambler and a drunk. And then he's got a young daughter and a couple that are married, and these people are coming and going all the time, and how the war impacts them. And then there's a large section about the Blitz. Okay. And that's interesting reading because you don't realize it was 57 straight nights that Germany bombed London. And in the end, you know, 1 million buildings were lost, 60% of the buildings lost were homes, and so many people killed and so many wounded that it's astonishing. What's really astonishing is Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany for 363 days, 11 months and 28 days alone. And that's amazing because they're an island nation. Everything that they need, they got to bring in. And meanwhile, you got U-boats sinking everything in the North Atlantic. And so it's really an amazing thing because the farmers in England could only raise enough food to last 160 days. So the other had to be imported. And so, but the book is really great. I mean, yeah, I felt bad when it was over, when I was done reading
Well,
it.
now I'm excited to read it.
Because I'm thinking, oh, I'm losing my friends.
That's the worst.
Because it's interesting because some of the secretaries who work for Churchill are in it. Jock Colville's pretty good. He's a young guy, and you know, he follows Churchill around. And Churchill likes to dictate his letters naked in the bathtub or laying in bed. When he met Roosevelt for one of the first times, he was buck naked, smoking a cigar, and drinking whiskey. And Roosevelt was sort of like, excuse me. He said, oh, no, come in. And he just, Churchill marched around. And,
Oh, gosh.
and the remarkable part is we're not talking someone who's built like Tarzan. We're talking this short little fat fellow who looked like a penguin waddling around. And his poor secretaries had to sit on the stool while he dictated from the bathtub. And so he had his quirks, but they worked for him, I guess.
I guess. You know,
So-
that was one of the. So there was a couple. Whatever day this one came out,
February 25th.
February 25th was like a big publication day, and 3 books came out that day that I had wanted to read, and I was like, I can't really buy any of these because
I just bit the bullet. I just
I know,
decided.
there was that one, and then the newest book in the Susan Elias McNeil and her Maggie Hope series. I think it's the 8th book came out for that, which is The King's Justice is the title of that one. And then I don't remember what the 3rd one was. And then a couple days ago, another book came out by Sarah J. Maas, who's an author I like. And it's like, come on, people, don't do this to me. Let's space these out a little more.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah.
that
In
I
fact,
don't have to avoid the internet for like weeks at a time.
Well, I just put on my calendar because I always write down when a book's coming out I want on the calendar. They're usually Tuesdays for some reason.
Yeah.
And John Sanford has a new Lucas Davenport coming out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But we talked about that one coming out, and so I went to the library. I was like, well, I'll put myself on hold for it and just see what it's at. And I think on Eric Larson's book, I'm pretty sure I am like number 64. Waiting
Wow.
for this
Well, I
book.
knew there was a huge list for it because I'm number
Yes.
1.
Well, and then I signed up for the Maggie Hope book too, and in that one I think I'm like 18th in line for that one. So I was like, there is something to be said for liking books that aren't quite as famous as Eric Larson. It's a shorter wait time.
Well,
but
that is true. I have to say that sometimes, well, it's worse though if you order the wrong edition and you get the audiobook when you have no way to listen to it.
you can listen on your phone.
Yeah, but it didn't come that way. It came in CDs. So what am I supposed to do with that? You know?
You have to buy a CD player.
And
you have
I
to
was
go
like-
on eBay and find a long
Yeah,
lost
you have any
CD
idea how
player.
frustrating that is to have a new book that you're dying to read and you have no way to access it? I suppose I could have driven around and listened to it in the car.
Well, and Tom told me, he's like, well, if you have books on CD, you can listen in the car. And I said, Tom, my car did not come with a CD player. They don't put them in cars anymore.
Yeah, isn't
And
that
I mean,
amazing?
The car I have now, we got in like 2016, I think, and it didn't have a CD player in it.
Well, I have a new laptop computer that does not have a disk drive in it.
Yeah.
So you can't even fake it at home or work listening to it. No, they're so when they say to get rid of CDs, they're serious.
They are, yes. Unless you're going to go, like, I'm sure you can still find VHS players if you dig high and wide for them. So I'm sure you could find one.
Yeah, well, I just was sort of bummed that day. But anyway, so then I said, forget it, and I downloaded it on Amazon and paid the $14.99, bit the bullet, and said the heck with it.
Well, good.
And in fact, I was on a spree of buying books. So what have you been reading?
What have I been reading? Well, I've been actually reading and listening quite a bit, and actually a lot better than last time we did this, where everything I'd read I disliked immensely. So the first one, I'll stick kind of with our nonfiction thing.
Yeah,
we got
because I have
going
more
on here.
nonfiction to talk about.
Oh, good. I mean, this will be a whole nonfiction episode.
Yes.
Actually, this might be Well, it's going to be, no, I have one more. We can still talk about nonfiction books. I was going to say, it's going to be a short episode if I only have one nonfiction I read. And
Well, I have two.
unlike me. So the one I did finish, it's called, and I think you read this one too, but it's called Bad Blood.
Yes.
The Secrets and Lies of a Silicon Valley Startup. And this is by John Carreyrou.
Yeah,
He works for,
Wall Street Journal.
yes, thank you. I was like, I'm going to say the wrong one. And I'm sitting here
It's either
next
the
to
New
a
York Times
newspaper
or
reporter.
they work at one of three, either Wall Street Journal,
The New York Times.
Times, or the Washington
Yes.
Post. That seems to be
So-
where they come from.
So this story he's written follows everything that went into the company called Theranos. And her name, Elizabeth, was her first name, but I can't think of her last name. It started with an S, just like just Elizabeth Smith or something simple like that.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank too.
But so she started this company, Theranos, and the whole point of view behind it was that the machines that she was building was going to be able to do billions and billions of different kinds of high-tech lab tests using a drop of blood.
And I was excited
problem-
about the premise.
Yes, and the problem with it is that for the years that they were running around selling stocks, taking money and everything,
Billions of dollars
billions
worth
of
of money.
dollars were and people on her board like Bernstein
Kissinger.
and Kissinger, the machines never worked.
No, they faked it from day one.
Yes, so nothing ever worked, and the people that worked at the company, it was bad. Like, they were followed, people were stalked if they left the company, and it's something that never worked, and that she still to this day has never said
It
nothing
doesn't work.
So,
They even sold it to Walgreens, for a
yes,
series of clinics.
Walgreens, was it them or CVS that built all this? They built all these specialized clinics inside these pharmacies to use these machines in these wellness centers. And then the machines never came. And then when they got like one, it would never work.
Right.
And then they were still having to draw regular blood draws because all of the stuff they were running through on the machines was never.
Well, they were
never
running
got
it
it. They
through
never
the
got-
machines. They
no.
were doing it the old-fashioned way back in the lab and
but
never telling anybody.
Yeah. And so it was just like, I felt like I'd gone down a rabbit hole, and like it really felt like sort of like a John Grisham book, like
Yeah.
that intrigue with something's going on, and it's like it didn't seem like it was something that could be real. And she sort of stylized herself after Steve Jobs, but
Yes.
unlike Steve Jobs and his Apple empire that has been built, her stuff just never worked. But
she
nobody
was
on
all
the
smoke
board,
and mirrors.
Yeah, but nobody on the board would believe that it didn't work.
No, and they were mesmerized by her. She
Mm-hmm.
must have been quite a.
Something.
Yeah, she was something because, and she had old men on her board, so I
Yeah.
figure they were all mesmerized by her youth and beauty. And because in one part of the book, it's Schultz, who had been on, I think, the original Bush's cabinet. His grandson or grandson, I think,
yeah.
worked for her, and he told him, he said, "This is smoke and
Yeah.
mirrors, it's not working." And his grandfather told him that he was wrong, but grandma didn't buy into it.
Grandma didn't believe it at all.
No, grandma didn't like the looks of things.
Yeah, no, but it just was, and sometimes when you read some of the books about company intrigue, they can be really kind of just dry and not super engaging. But the way he wrote this book, read really well.
It was more like you said, a suspense or
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of like the movie Sneakers, or like
Yes.
those different things where everything's Sneakers.
Yeah.
For anybody, you should see it if you haven't. It's an older movie, but it's got a great cast.
Yeah.
But a lot of intrigue and
Yeah, it's the book the thing that's interesting about it is she was raising money hand over fist through venture capital companies, and it was the writer who wrote this book. He actually is the one who wrote a story in Wall Street Journal and said, "Hey, wait a minute, I've got some questions." And he was the first one to publicly start raising red flags, and then it went south rather quickly from that point on.
it did, yeah. But it was just amazing that
She got away with it as long as she did.
and the way she would pit the different departments against each other,
Yes.
so that even within the company there was no real support. or
Yeah,
anything.
and how about that boyfriend who was like president or something? He seemed to have some issues too.
I think they just all did.
Yeah.
It's easy to say.
So
But yeah,
she's actually in trial now, I think.
I think so. Yeah,
for
but
all
I think
sorts of-
I still think to this point I don't think she's admitted
No, she
she's
hasn't.
done anything wrong.
I just don't know how she's paying lawyers because they've got to be expensive. Because at one point her company was valued in literally the billions of dollars.
Yeah,
And now I think it's zero
yeah.
and stuff. So wow. But I did follow her because I found it interesting. I like the idea because as someone who has small little veins that roll, having blood taken is an ordeal.
Runs in the family.
Yeah,
We
it's
both
always.
hate it.
I always start out the process with asking the person, "Are you good at this?" And then they invariably smile and say, "Yes, I am." And then I say, "Good." And then of course they poke and prod, and eventually they either get lucky or
Oh,
they
no,
find someone new.
See, I have 2 places in my arms where blood can be drawn, and I go in and I go, you can look, but these are the spots you need to use. Don't even try it.
Oh, I
So,
got it in my hand,
but-
my wrist.
But I mean, I thought with the premise sounds like a really good idea. With
It is
being
because
able to
the
do
idea
all
of,
this
well,
testing.
if they could
Yeah.
just take a drop of blood out of your finger, like, how wonderful would that be versus this wrestling with the tubes?
Yeah. But obviously, that's not going to happen anytime soon.
No, you're right.
Do you want me to go on with another nonfiction?
Sure.
Or do you want to switch it up for a little bit? Or
Well, we are going to return to World War II because we're going to talk about Dunkirk, the miracle of Dunkirk.
I wonder how you decided to read about Dunkirk.
Literally, I was in the middle of the Churchill book
Yeah.
when he's talking about Dunkirk. And I thought, well, I really should know more about this. I had read Walter Lord's book on Dunkirk a few years ago, but I wanted to know more. So I went online and looked for a book that told it more from the perspective of organizing the Dunkirk evacuation
Okay.
versus from the soldier's point of
Okay.
view, standing on the shore waiting for the ship to come in. And so it's called Miracle of Deliverance by David Boyle. And it's not a super long book. I mean, it's like, I want to say maybe 100 pages. But it's good because I was able to stop reading Churchill, read Dunkirk, and go back to Churchill without really missing a beat. But the thing that's interesting about it, I think, is that they were able to do it. And when we were in Europe, we were only 40 miles from Dunkirk because we were at Calais, and I had to take Dramamine across the English Channel. I had to take Dramamine to drive around Germany too. But I can't imagine how they crossing the English Channel with German planes shooting at you when it was rough and
in a tugboat.
yeah, or a ferry, or a yacht, or a
Rowboat?
almost,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's truly a remarkable story, and it's one of the great ones because who would have thought it was possible?
And that's probably why they decided to make it into a movie.
That movie isn't as good as the
Okay.
book.
I haven't seen the movie yet. So.
Yeah, your mom was really disappointed in it because it doesn't give you.
Well, when you've been married to someone in the army, and you have heard about all these things so much,
You visited the
and you
sites,
visited the places, you kind of got that working against you. So,
but the I think the thing with Dunkirk that's interesting is that they apparently it's a marshy area, and so Hitler stopped his tanks from advancing, and if he had not done that, he would have literally drove them into the sea. And so it was really kind of a serendipitous series of events that saved the army.
yeah.
You have Ramsey over here trying to find boats, and you've got Hitler here, holding his tanks, while you've got Goring trying to blow the world apart from the air.
Yeah.
And because of overcast weather, they weren't flying, and so they had a very small window to rescue people. So
Yeah.
it's really a remarkable story. And did you ever see the movie Mrs. Miniver?
I've seen the VHS case at Nana's house. But
Well,
no, I've
it's-
never watched the actual movie.
It was very popular during World War II. It's a story about an English family, and the husband goes on the takes his boat and so it's a good scene and within
well,
the
I'll
context.
have to steal it.
Well, you need a VHS.
I have a VHS
Oh,
player.
you do?
I do.
Do you crank it to run it?
No, it's plugged into the TV. Apparently, it was at our old house. It was underneath in the TV stand, and Tom just forgot it was there and never mentioned that he had a VHS player. So I just
Wow.
didn't know about it for 6 years.
I gave Mrs. Miniver to your sister or your mom.
Okay,
So
I can
you have
steal it
it.
from her house.
So now your turn.
Yep, so I have 2 other ones I read. First one was A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, this is another Fred Rogers, as I have a major love for Mr. Rogers.
Is that
Everyone's
the
gonna-
one the movie's
so
based on?
This is another, so there's a whole lot of books that are just similar to the other ones I've mentioned that I've read with Mr. Rogers, and they're all quotes that he's said over the years or that he liked. But then at the front of this one, the article that was in Rolling Stones?
It could be.
Was it Rolling Stones? Here, let's go to the front and find out. It was in some radio or some magazine. But so at the beginning of it now, they've put his article in the front. And then it continues with Mr. Rogers' works. And again, it's just kind of uplifting little Mr. Rogers moments that I love. And I haven't seen the movie yet because life has been crazy busy, but I'm excited to see how Tom Hanks does as Mr. Rogers because I like
Supposed
Tom
to
Hanks.
be great.
And I picked up Tom Hanks has written a book of short stories. And I recently came into possession of that as well. So I will be reading that also. But the audio book of the Tom Hanks ones are read by Tom Hanks, which I think would be fun to listen to.
Okay.
And then the other nonfiction one I read is Talking as Fast as I Can, From Gilmore Girls to Gilmore Girls by Lauren Graham. And so this is a memoir written by the actress who played Lorelai Gilmore on Gilmore
Okay.
Girls. And because I am a huge TV freak like that, and I binge watch things, and Gilmore Girls will always kind of have a little sentimental value to me because that is what I watched the first month that I was home alone with Alex after he was born, because I couldn't watch Game of Thrones or anything like that without freaking out that something terrible would happen to my child. And so Gilmore Girls is nice, and it got to the point actually where when I was watching it and the theme song would come on, Alex's head would go, I know that song, and he'd look around. So it's kind of one of those shows that just has kind of a soft spot for me. And the premise of the show is it's a mother and daughter, both actually named Lorelai, but one is called Lorelai and the other is Rory, and it's them growing, it's what they do while they live in Stars Hollow, their little town.
Okay.
And so Lauren Graham wrote a book that it's her memoir, but it sort of talks about a little bit about her acting journey, and then it talks about the road with Gilmore Girls, and then it coming back because they also rebooted it. Was it like 3 years ago on Netflix?
Okay.
They did an updated present day version. And so it was really interesting to talk to. But the main thing with Gilmore Girls is it is a very, very, very wordy show. They talk a lot, and they talk very, very fast.
Really? How
Yes, they
interesting.
talk fast, and lots of coffee drinking in this, but they talk really, really quickly. And actually, Lauren Graham, when she's reading her autobiography, she talks just as fast as this character talks. So this is like really what she talks like, and it's just this constant stream of consciousness, and it just keeps going and going and going, and it's just like, I was
Wow.
like, well, the audiobook itself is only 4 hours long, and she gets through like
5,000 pages.
a 10-year time span in like 4 hours, and it's almost like I had to pause the audiobook to go because I wanted to breathe for her. But so I mean, it was fun to listen to and hear her talk about, and how everybody, it's fun when you like TV shows to then read about the people that were on them and find out, yes, they actually did get along. It actually was a lot of fun to do, as opposed to everybody hated each other
Yes.
and nobody wanted to be by each other on stage, and it was this terrible thing. So yeah, it was really good, and I just exhausting to kind of listen to. But then when I think back to it, even the show, I remember being like, they are saying so many words, and they're just going so quickly, but I understand everything that's happening apparently. But
Well, that's good.
yeah, but we've reached the end of our time. So we gave you guys a nonfiction episode. I think that's the first all nonfiction episode of Off the Shelf we've ever done since we started doing this. So that's a milestone for us.
That's right.
So we will wrap it up here. And if you have any questions for us or want to recommend some nonfiction, you can reach out to us on Facebook or Instagram, or our email, which is offtheshelfbooktalk@gmail.com. And we will see you next time.